Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to talk to Elisa Rumici. She's a pianist and she's going to speak a little bit about her career plans for 2026. How are you doing today?
Ciao, I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me again. I'm very happy to be back here.
Thanks for being here. And I was wondering, what are your plans for 2026, the artistic goals and projects?
I feel like for me, it's gonna be a little bit like a transition year because I'm finishing my PhD. Hopefully, I'm gonna publish some articles I've been working on. But I'm also working on the next things. So it's a little bit this bridge phase, and I'm very excited about it.
That's amazing. And how do these projects reflect your evolution as a pianist?
I feel like when I started playing the piano, I started playing music by different composers, experimenting, discovering them. And I feel like over time, I gradually came to understand which are the composers that allow me to express myself in the best way that feel closer to me. So I feel like the evolution in a way is represent it, I move towards a repertoire that represents me in a way that is more and more personal every time.
And from this repertoire, which one is the one that challenges you the most as a pianist?
On one hand, there are pieces that challenge me. For example, technically, some very virtuosic pieces that I learned, like some etudes by Debussy, for example, or some big piano concertos. But in a different way, some of the pieces I've been working on, not only as a pianist but as a researcher as well. I'm thinking about pieces by Rautavaara or Gilda Ruta, who are the focus of my research project. They challenge me in the sense that there is not a big performance tradition behind them. The piano solo pieces by Gilda Ruta, I was the first person recording them. And so there the challenge was really to find my voice and to understand how to convey this music in the best way when I don't really have models that I can take inspiration from. With Rautavaara, it's different because there are some pianists who recorded these pieces before, but not as many as you would have, for example, when you play something by Beethoven or Chopin.
So you don't have any reference, you'll be the first one to play it, and so you will be the reference, right?
Yeah, no pressure, right?
No pressure. So tell me more about this universe you're gonna explore, this composer, and which ones are you gonna explore this, or are you gonna play this semester?
So on one hand, I'm gonna play more and more the piano music by Gilda Ruta because this is the program I just recorded, and this is the CD that came out in September. But I don't want to do concerts where I only play her music. I think it's very interesting to play together with the composers she herself played and that inspired her because she was a great pianist. And so when I present her music, I like to do it next to the music by Schumann, by Liszt, because we know these were composers she really loved. And I think this is interest to give a little bit of context as well. And together with that, I'm also playing a lot of Rautavaara because this is the topic of my PhD. And this is a composer I love very much. But again, when I play his music, I don't like to only play that. But again, I like to give a little bit of context. And the program that I've been playing the most recently is this piano virtuosity program, which presents etudes by Rautavaara and by Debussy, because we know that Debussy had been a very important reference for Rautavaara. And I think that when you play their etudes, you can really see how the language moves from one to the other. It's very fascinating.
That's amazing. And the one thing you said that is very important is that music is language, and you can recognize the text somehow, right? And this somehow this is the way you decide on which project to say yes or no. For example, the text that really speaks to you.
Yeah, again, on one hand, sometimes I like to challenge myself and try things that are completely out of my comfort zone. And I've had great experiences learning also pieces that, at first sight didn't really speak to me. Um, but that was a great opportunity because, I really had to find my way into the music and I learned so much. And, sometimes you don't like something just because you don't know it. And this happened to me, and I was lucky because my teacher, Professor Filippo Gamba, always pushed me a little bit out of my comfort zone, and he really knows how to choose the repertoire. And so I trust him, and he was always right in what he suggested. Um, but when I choose a piece now, especially, it's not just about the music. Of course, it's about the music, but it's not just about that. It's also about the story, and what I can convey and what this music represents, in my opinion. And gradually, I became more and more interested in expanding my repertoire towards pieces that have not been performed much. I think this is also interesting for the public, right? To present them, to give them something new that they haven't had the chance to love already.
That's true. As you said, for example, Beethoven is played by many pianists. You have a reference. But when you listen to a composer that not many people play, you have perhaps you expand your ideas. This is amazing, a great work. And tell me about your routine. How do you study? How do you prepare yourself for these challenges you have?
I used to have a routine, but now that I'm doing many different things and I have to balance, teaching and researching and performing and a little bit having a private life at times, having a routine has become a luxury that I don't always have. But I try to have some stable things. Something that became incredibly important for me is to start the day disconnected. I don't use my phone in the morning. I read. This is very important for me. I've always loved reading. And so the first hour in the morning, I just take it for myself. I do a little bit of yoga or qigong, something like that. I read. And then I like to start with the most difficult thing. So if I have to learn a new piece, I'm going to start with that. And then I'm going to move towards the easier things. And I always try to make sure that there is a lot of playing and a lot of research within my day. And then I squeeze in time for administration things and all the rest. And then, of course, there are days where my focus is on teaching. And so that is the priority. I feel like, when I was a student, then of course all my day would be dedicated to practicing. Now it's a little bit different, but I always try, and I've talked about it on my Instagram profile as well, to decide every day which are my main three priorities and to organize them from the most difficult to the easiest. And then the rest of the time, I try to do what's left.
That's amazing. Talking more about the Instagram and how has your relationship with your audience changed through social media?
I don't know, because I feel like social media is a word that I'm still exploring. I'm not great at that, I have to say. I'm still trying to figure out how to bring what I'm doing out there. And I have to say, what's very important for me is to be as authentic as I can, So I know that there are some strategies that would work better on social media, but I don't really follow them because I want to make sure that what I present really shows who I am and what I'm trying to do. And so that if people like what I do, they really like the reality of it. I got some very nice surprises because through social media, I actually got to know some wonderful people who are interested in my work, who shared what they are doing, and who They don't only share the interest in the topic, but also in the way I'm trying to do it. And so that was a wonderful way to connect with people who have a similar attitude towards the music world. And I find this to be incredibly enriching.
Your Instagram is very interesting. You're sharing an artist's point of view for people. This is amazing. They can connect you and get to know the artists better, right? And what can you say about the female composers, the important ones?
Thanks for saying this, because I feel like when we work on something, when we research on something, our perspective has to be very transparent, very clear. And so when I work on discovering repertoire that has been forgotten for centuries, I don't pretend I'm gonna do it as a musicologist or as a music theorist, because this is not really my field. I do it as a pianist, and I think in a way it's empowering for other performers as well to see that as a performer, what you can find out, what you can research on is meaningful. And when it comes to women composers, my interest originally was not on women composers per se, but I came across some music that I had never heard before. And then I wonder, okay, why is this repertoire completely outside the canon? Why didn't people care about it? And very often it's not because of the music per se, but it's because of other reasons that for me are very interesting to research on, because there can be political issues, there can be gender issues. And when you reflect on that, then the biggest question that come to your mind is, why do we like something and why don't we like something else? And when you see how certain music has been narrated, how certain histories have been presented or cancelled, then you discover that maybe there's so much more you would love, but you just don't know about it. And so, of course, when I play music by women composers, I want to be fully honest, there are a lot of pieces that I don't like. And that I'm never gonna say, I like it because it was written by a woman composer. No, if I don't like it, I don't like it. In the same way as when I play something by Chopin, for example, there are some pieces I don't particularly love. But I think it's interesting to think about why you do like it or why you don't like it. And another thing is, people should be given the opportunity to make a choice. It's like, people should have the opportunity to make their own choice, and we shouldn't make it for them. So when we cancel something, when you don't give people the opportunity to listen to something, we are making the choice for them. And this, I think, it's incredibly unfair. And so, when I do conferences, I don't expect people to leave a room loving the same pieces I love, but I want to give them the opportunity to listen to them and then to decide, maybe they are not going to like them, and that's fine, but at least they know. And very often, especially I'm thinking now about Italian classical music, when I was a student and I would study music history, I would read these chapters where they would say, in a certain period of history, Italian music was only opera. That's not true. There was a lot of music written for the piano, for example, but we don't know about it because often was written by composers that weren't given the same visibility as opera composers. And so I'm fine. Maybe the opera, the pieces that were written back then were better. I don't know, maybe. But if we say that there was not something else, then we are saying something false. And this is something I cannot really accept. And this is where my interest towards women composers come from. I think we all have the right to discover what was out there. And as a wonderful colleague of mine from Finland, Nuovo Visto, said, we have a right to musical heritage. Doesn't matter if this repertoire was written by a woman or a man, but we need to know what was out there.
I understand. It's like a text. You're gonna read the text, and you have the opportunity of getting to your own conclusions. And this is the mission of an artist. You're gonna show people art, and they are gonna judge by themselves, right?
Yeah, exactly. And something we did in the Feminale Festival that I organized together with this wonderful friend and colleague of mine, Margaret Oixter, we decided to have a concert without the written program. And that was very interesting because, this way the public is just going to listen without being too influenced by the names. Because, and this happens to me as well, I love, for example, the music by Robert Schumann. If I read Robert Schumann on the program, I'm already thinking, oh, I'm going to love it because it's from one of my favorite composers. If I don't know who wrote something, then chances I'm gonna listen without biases are higher. And that's what happened. And I noticed that the public liked it. And so this is something I'm for sure gonna do again in the future.
So, do you think recommendation for people that are gonna listen to concerts is to be open-minded and not attached to prejudgment? Like, I'm gonna hear this concert. Let me be open to understand if I really like this music, what this music says to me.
Something very interesting happened when I performed for the first time this concert dedicated to piano virtuosity with only etudes by, so we had Chopin, Debussy, and Rautavaara. And Rautavaara in Italy is not a very, very, very well-known composer yet. Unfortunately, his music is wonderful. Plus, he has this name that sounds a little bit difficult to read for an Italian. And so I imagine that the first impression, and this is what I saw, for example, when I taught Rautavaara's piano music to my students, they were a little bit skeptical at first place. They were like, oh, okay, I don't know this. What a difficult name, what a new music, I don't know what it is about. And plus, this wonderful composer died a few years ago, so he can be considered historically as a modern composer. And I know that many people are skeptical when you present modern music that they don't know. So what I did, again, I mixed the etudes. I played, for example, the etudes on third by Debussy and then by Rautavaara. And on the program, I didn't write the names of the composers. And I gave this questionnaire to the public. And in the end, people found Debussy's etudes to be much more modern, much more distant in a certain way, a little bit more difficult to approach. And Rautavaara's etudes were considered beautiful, very familiar, very understandable, very approachable. But I'm quite sure they would have felt differently if they had known the names. Because they know Debussy and they don't know Rautavaara. So probably they would have found Debussy's music closer. And this way they could listen without this bias. And then the result was very interesting.
I understand. So it happens to your students, for example, if you say, let's learn some Mozart. So you have a credential, Mozart is Mozart, everyone knows Mozart. So they have less resistance in a certain way.
Absolutely. I just wrote an article about it. It was published by the journal Analytica. And it was precisely about that because I took the etudes by Rautavaara and I used them as a case study to investigate how students responded to unfamiliar repertoire. And it was very interesting because, this beautiful music has many elements of connection with the tradition that my students knew. Because they, as I said, they are inspired by Debussy, but also by Chopin, also by Liszt. So at first they were all skeptical, all of them. But then when they started playing the pieces and they started noticing these elements that actually connect this music to music they had already played, they changed attitudes completely and they came to love this composer. And so this was an incredibly interesting experience for me as well. And again, this is one of those cases where I feel like my activity as a performer, as a researcher, and as a teacher merge, because every aspect is informing the other. So it's a beautiful opportunity for me as well to explore something new.
So I can say you philosophize about music in a very good way. You have to think music is something you feel. Also, you have to think about and you have to understand how it connects with the individual, right?
Absolutely. And there's something that a lot of people seem to, maybe take a little bit for granted, which is the role of education. I feel like when you research on something, then there is an incredibly important aspect, which is dissemination. It's not important just to discover something, but also to bring it to people who don't know about it. And teaching, as well as playing for audiences that, for example, do not regularly attend classical music concerts, is a wonderful opportunity to do that.
We were talking about this credential that composers have. For example, Johann Sebastian Bach is a very important composer to music. No contest about this. But for example, when you listen to Bach, perhaps you like some of his compositions and you don't identify yourself too much with some other compositions. How do you feel about this?
I think this is something that people still do not always have the courage to say out loud. And, I grew up playing the traditional repertoire that we all love. And, my favorite composers are the composers that we see the most on concert programs. So Schumann, Liszt, Debussy, Scriabin, so all composers that are very traditional, right? But still, it happens that maybe a great composer like Bach, like Beethoven, like Mozart, wrote something that you don't like particularly or that you don't find particularly interesting, because they were human beings as well. And I feel like when it comes to those heroes, we see them so close to God almost that we don't have the courage to say, maybe they also did something that wasn't particularly great. And I feel like with composers that are lesser known, we start from the idea that they weren't played because they weren't good. And so we immediately assume that what they did was bad. And when we see some composers being programmed very often, we assume that they necessarily were good in everything they did. And I think this is a limit. And, we should have a courage, to just say, I like this and I like this less. And as you were saying earlier when we were talking, this has a lot to do with education as well, because I feel like students should be empowered and should have the opportunity to become more critical about what they do and about their artistic voice. Which doesn't mean that they shouldn't play also music that they don't like. It's very important to do so. It's a beautiful challenge, and then maybe you change idea. But we shouldn't assume that because something is famous, then it's necessarily good. And because something is not, then it's not.
That's true. And somehow, as a musician, are there any interpretations that you must do that you don't really like very much, but at the same time, you have to apply all your energy and to express this song as tell a story with the song. Is there any repertoire that you think is not connected to you, but you have to play all the time?
No, I would say no. I was lucky because my piano professors have always been very open-minded and very good at suggesting me repertoire. And so I would say there are some pieces that I played in the past that I wouldn't play now because I don't think I can give much. There are some pieces where I don't think I'm the best person who can share something through that music. But still, for me, it was very important to put the effort and do my best to learn them, because I became a better pianist doing that. And I also discovered something about that composer that I wouldn't have discovered if I hadn't played that music. And now especially, you know, one of my professors once, we were having lesson and he was suggesting some things, and then he said, you know, but eventually you are the one who's going to be on stage. So you're going to take responsibility of what you do and how you do it. And that's how I also teach my students. You know, I say what my opinion is, but I encourage them to find their own way. And then after all, they have to be convincing and they have to take the responsibility of what they do. It's not going to be me on stage. It's going to be them. And I would much rather prefer them to play in a way that maybe it's not my favorite one, but that is true to themselves and that really represent what they want to do, and that's gonna make them feel confident and comfortable and themselves 100%, than having them doing something just because I told them to do so. For me, this doesn't make any sense. I can already play the way I want. I don't need other people to do the same. And when you go to a concert, it happened to me many times. You know, I went to listen to wonderful pianists who played, for example, the same pieces I studied in a completely different way. And so if you ask me, then I would say, you know, maybe I would do this differently. But how interesting is it to listen to someone bringing a new perspective to something, you know? And then sometimes it also happened that I started listening and I was a little bit, you know, like doubting. I was like, okay, what's going on? And then by the end of the piece, I changed the idea on my performance as well. And then I went back home and I tried new things. So, yeah. So I do believe that, you know, the score is a reference and you have to approach it with in the most respectful way you can, trying to learn from better pianists, trying to learn from your professor, really trying to gain insight on what the composer might have wanted. But then there isn't a fixed way to do so. There can be multiple interpretations possible. And what matters, in my opinion, is that you're incredibly honest and respectful in your approach.
Congratulations for your beautiful work. Thank you very much for being here. I would like you to leave a message to people in 2026, people that are watching, the musicians, please.
Oh, what a responsibility. Well, my message is that I wish and I really hope that this 2026 can bring you a lot of music that makes you feel well, that allow you to discover something new about yourself, something new about the world, and that gives you the opportunity to express yourself in the way that makes you feel the best.